All right, so part two of Congress is going to deal with the committee systems that is prevalent in Congress. It's how they get their work done, their staffing, and then how a bill becomes a law, which is very significant, and some of the idiosyncrasies of that, and then some of the things that are going to have an effect on how Congress makes decisions. And so we're going to look at the committee system first. And so what you have to understand about committees is this is where the work is really done. And there are different types of committees in the Congress. There are standing committees, select committees, joint committees, and conference committees. And so we're going to deal with the standing committees first. And standing committees are permanent. They remain in existence from one session to another, regardless of which party is in control. These are the most important committees because they propose and write legislation. So the bills that come out of Congress, not all 435 members in the House and 100 members in the Senate get together and create these laws. They're created in committees. And each committee is going to cover a particular subject area. And so, for example, there are committees on agriculture, there are committees on healthcare, there are committees on Veterans Affairs and intelligence and things of that nature. One of the most important in the House of Representatives is going to be the House Ways and Means Committee. And then, conversely, on the Senate side, you have the Senate Finance Committee. And these are going to be important and significant committees because they both have jurisdiction over taxes, trade, and entitlement programs. Entitlement programs being things like Social Security, Medicaid, etc. And then the Senate and House Appropriations Committees are also a very powerful committee because they determine funding for various programs. So they're going to decide who gets what money and if budgets are going to be cut or budgets are going to be raised, etc. And all standing committees except the House Rules Committee receive bills and formulate them into legislation. So that's kind of where the work is going to be done. It's where bills are going to be formulated. The next type of committee is a select committee. Select committees are temporary. They do not have the power to present legislation to the full Congress. Select committees are set up to address a specific issue or highlight or investigate specific events. And so a couple of examples of select committees might be the Senate Watergate Committee in 1973 that was investigating the Watergate scandal under President Nixon. And then the House Select Committee on Benghazi that was created in 2012 that investigated the Benghazi disaster. So these are going to be very temporary. They're going to be set up for a specific reason, and then they will probably be dissolved once they have come to the conclusion of their investigations or whatever it is that they are going to address. We then have joint committees. Joint committees are formed with members from both the Senate and the House of Representatives. And there are 4 such joint committees, and they perform a certain task. The 4 joint committees are the Economic Joint Committee, the Taxation Joint Committee, the Library Joint Committee, and the Printing Joint Committee. And so they are permanent committees, but they do not have the power to report legislation. They essentially have some kind of a task that they overseeing the Library of Congress or printing or the economy or taxation or something of that nature. So they're permanent, but they do not present legislation to the Congress necessarily. And then the final committee type is a conference committee. And these are temporary joint committees that work out differences in similar bills so that they can be sent to the president for signature to become a law. So when the House and the Senate pass different versions of the same bill, they deal with the same thing and they come to their own conclusions and they don't look the same. Then these conference committees are sent to a conference committee And the conference committee has to hammer out the details to make them identical before sending it to the president for his signature or his veto. So, in order for a bill to become a law, it has to pass both houses of Congress in the same form. And so oftentimes the House will pass something, the Senate will pass something, and they will be similar, but they will have significant differences. So they will then go to the conference committee, which will be made up of people in the House and people in the Senate, and they will hammer out all the details, and they'll compromise and decide what the bill should look like in its finality, and then they'll send it back to each chamber, and it will either pass or fail, but if it passes, then it can go to the president. And so these conference committees are going to be the mechanism that works out all of these little kinks in the different bills passed by the different chambers of the legislature. Within each committee, the hierarchy is based on seniority for the most part. And so this means that rank is given to an individual on the basis of length of continuous service on a committee in Congress. So if you've served on that committee in Congress the longest, typically you are going to have some significant clout and power on that committee. Typically, committees are going to be chaired by the most senior member of the ruling party. So in the House of Representatives currently, the Democrats are in control, so all Democratic chairs are going to be, all committee chairs are going to be of the Democratic Party, and conversely in the Senate, they are controlled by the Republicans, so all committee chairs are going to be controlled by Republicans, and they typically have what is known as a ranking member, and the ranking member is the most senior member of the minority party. So you have the chair, who is usually from the ruling party, and the ranking member, who is the highest ranking individual from the minority party. Now, seniority rules in regards to committees has been tradition, but the rules haven't been executed hard and fast, and they have been skirted. And the most notable situation in which seniority was sort of taken out of the equation was in 1995, when the Republicans regained control of the House of Representatives for the first time in about 40 years. The new Speaker of the House, a man by the name of Newt Gingrich, he violated the tradition of seniority and appointed committee chairmanships to individuals of his party that were loyal to him. And so there was, for the first time, a large-scale move away from the seniority rule, but Democrats have gone back to utilizing seniority, but they have altered the practices, giving freshmen the opportunity to get on committees to increase the possibility of their reelection. So while seniority is sort of the tradition, sometimes the tradition is broken, and it's not always going to be the case. But suffice to say, if you do have seniority on a specific committee, then the odds are for you, being the chair of that committee or the ranking member of that committee are much more significant. So staff members. The staff members are the individuals that do the legwork. And congressmen and women and senators employ large numbers of staff members. Okay? About 11,500 total staff members for Washington and home offices. Now, when you think about this, there are 535 members of the House of of the House and the Senate of the legislature, and there are 11,500 individuals, staff people that work in these congressional offices and these home offices as well. That's a lot of people. So if you take 11,500 and you divide that by 535, that's about 21 and a half, and I know you can't really have a half a person, but that's about 21 and a half people on average for each member of the House and the Senate. So it's going to vary from individual to individual. But not only do congressmen and women have staffers that work for them, each committee in the House and the Senate has their own committee staff. And these committee staffers, there are 2,000 committee staffers that are attached to particular committees regardless of political party and power. So they're going to stay with that committee and work with whoever's on it regardless of who is in power. And so when you have a member of the House or the Senate that says they championed a particular piece of legislation or they created this piece of legislation, that's probably a little bit of a misnomer because the staff is the one that does all the work. You've got people whose job it is to actually formulate policy, and then members of the House and the Senate are going to sort of sign off on that. They're going to be okay with that. They're going to direct the staff to create it in such a way that it is palatable to them and to their supporters. But members of the House and the Senate, they don't particularly sit down and write out every piece of legislation that they sponsor. It's going to be done by the staff members. Now, no discussion of the legislature would be complete without looking at how a bill becomes a law. And so we need to look at this process, and it's really kind of hard to boil it down because we simplify it because it's an introductory government course, but it is a very arduous and long process. And you know, just to kind of lighten the mood a little bit, I always like to play this "How a Bill Becomes a Law."
The universe is in chaos.
Excuse me, by Schoolhouse Rock. And I always thought that it might be a little bit goofy or childish to play this for my undergraduates until I was in my master's program and my constitutional law professor actually played this in my graduate program, so I don't feel so bad making you watch it. It'll be about 3 minutes of your life that you'll never get back, but it does outline the idea a little bit as to how a bill becomes a law. So if you haven't seen this, watch it. If you have, you can skip forward.
Suit up, Spider-Man.
I didn't think I was going to have to save the world. I want to go back on my trip with the girl who I really like and tell her how I feel. MJ, I'm
Spider-Man.
What?
I mean, it's kind of obvious.
Spider-Man, Far From Home, rated PG-13.
Whew, you sure gotta climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building here in Washington. Well, I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee. But I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience and courage.
Well, I got this far. When I started, I wasn't even a bill. I was just an idea. Some folks back home decided they wanted a law passed, so they called their local congressman, and he said, "You're right, there ought to be a law." And he sat down and wrote me out and introduced me to Congress, and I became a bill. And I'll remain a bill until they decide to make me a law. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And I got as far as Capitol Hill. Well, now I'm stuck in committee, and I'll sit here and wait while a few key congressmen discuss and debate whether they should let me be a law. I hope and pray that they will. But today I am still just a bill.
Listen to those congressmen arguing. Is all that discussion and debate about you?
Yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. Most bills never even get this far. I hope they decide to report on me favorably, otherwise I may die.
Die?
Yeah, die in committee. Oh, but it looks like I'm going to live. Now I go to the House of Representatives and they vote on me.
If they vote yes, what happens?
Then I go to the Senate and the whole thing starts all over again.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And if they vote for me on Capitol Hill, well, then I'm off to the White House where I'll wait in a line with a lot of other bills for the president to sign. And if he signs me, then I'll be a law. How I hope and pray that he will. But today I am still just a bill.
You mean even if the whole Congress says you should be a law, the president can still say no?
Yes, that's called a veto. If the president vetoes me, I have to go back to Congress and they vote on me again, and by that time you're so
By
old.
that time, it's very unlikely that you become a law. It's not easy to become a law, is it?
No, but how I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
He signed your bill. Now you're a law.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so as I said, that'll be 3 minutes of your life that you're never going to get back, but hopefully it will be of some help. So let's look at a little bit more in depth about how a bill becomes a law, and talk about it in less cartoonish terms. So, the president or an agency in the government can craft a piece of legislation, but it is not a bill until it is sponsored and introduced in a chamber by a senator or representative. And so the steps for a bill to become a law are as follows. It becomes a bill and is referred to a committee for deliberations. So as we just discussed, there are specific committees for different subjects. No floor action can be taken on a bill until a committee has taken it up and deliberated, and committees can deliberate for as long as they need. Bills can be referred to a subcommittee beneath the overall committee. If the committee likes it, they typically will vote it out of committee and to the whole chamber. Committees are a wonderful way to kill bills. In fact, between 80 and 90% of the bills that are introduced, somewhere around 10,000 in total, are killed in committee. They're left floundering in committee, and it's a wonderful way to sort of bury them and get rid of them. But if they are voted favorably by a committee and they are passed out of the committee, then they go before the House and the Senate for debate. Now, debate in the House and the Senate looks a little bit different. In the House, debate is very restricted. All the time allotted to debate the bill is controlled by the bill's sponsor and the leading opponent. And so they can allocate time to those who agree to speak for or against the bill. And you have about 5 minutes time whenever you are debating in the House of Representatives. You're not going to be given very much time to debate the bill. And it's going to be very closely controlled because there are 435 members, which is a lot of people. And if we gave them carte blanche to debate the bill as much as they wanted, even less would get done than currently gets done. However, in the Senate, things are much less restricted. In the Senate, there is unlimited debate. Very, very unrestricted, unlimited debate on the topic or the bill. When we talked about the creation of the legislature, we talked about the Senate being the more deliberative body. And so they have unrestricted debate on a topic or a bill. And once a senator has the floor, they may speak as long as they wish. So, as long as they keep talking, they can hold the floor. Historically, this has been utilized to force individuals into changing an unsavory bill. And this is a tactic known as the filibuster. The filibuster is where members of the Senate prevent action on legislation they oppose by continuously talking and holding the floor until the majority backs down, agrees to alter the bill, or invokes what is known as cloture. Now, cloture is a procedure to end a filibuster. And you need a vote of 3/5 of the chamber, which is 60 votes, to end debate. And so, if you look at the makeup of the Senate, it's usually split very evenly. There's going to be like 52 one party, 48 another. So in order to get 60 votes, that's a very, very hard thing to do. And it's going to require that you get some bipartisan support. Well, if you're on the other political party and you don't want the bill to pass, then you're not going to vote for cloture. You're going to allow this person to filibuster it until the bill dies, the majority gives up, they agree to change it, or whatever. And so cloture is a vote of 60 votes to end debate. because things have become so polarized and debate has been used as a method to stall certain actions in the Senate, in 2013, the Democrats invoked something that they referred to as the nuclear option. And the nuclear option in the Senate meant that under Majority Leader Harry Reid, the rules were altered to create this nuclear option, meaning that they only needed a majority vote to invoke cloture. And so typically, presidential nominees to the Supreme Court or to the federal courts are going to be things that are filibustered. Well, in 2013, many of President Obama's nominees were being filibustered. They were not getting a vote. And so the majority leader, Democrats were in control at the time, the majority leader, Harry Reid, decided he'd never get the 60 votes for cloture to end debate and vote on these people. So he invoked this nuclear option. And it is a very controversial piece of or rule change that has been utilized, and it was excoriated by Republicans as the downfall of the Senate in 2013. But it has been utilized now that it has been used, and now it has been utilized by both parties for them to get whatever it is that they want. And so it's one of those things that is debated as to whether it's a good thing, a bad thing. Who knows? But there have been some very significant filibusters in history, and the longest filibuster in history was when a senator from North Carolina? Maybe South Carolina. Senator Strom Thurmond in 1957 conducted a 24-hour and 18-minute filibuster where he filibustered the Civil Rights Act of 1957. And so we've had a very, very long filibuster. There have been some very notable filibusters in history as well, but the longest filibuster is 24 hours and 18 minutes. And once you take the floor, you don't even have to talk about the bill anymore. You can read from the phone book. You can read your favorite bedtime story. You can read from the Bible. You can talk about whatever you want, so long as you don't yield the floor. You maintain that floor. And so it's this battle of attrition between the opposing camps to see who's going to blink first, essentially. But once debate is concluded, usually with this vote of cloture, then a vote is going to be held. And when we vote, leaders schedule a vote in each chamber. Rarely will a leader bring a bill to a vote if they don't already have the votes to pass it, or if they want to defeat it, the votes to defeat it. Okay? And when voting takes place, this is where those whips, we talked about the different positions of power in the House and the Senate. We talked about whips. This is where the whips are utilized. They whip up the vote and make sure they have enough votes to pass the bill or to fail the bill, depending on what it is the majority wants to happen. So if the bill is passed in both chambers, then it is going to be sent to a conference committee. And members from each chamber, usually individuals who are senior members of the committee the bill originated in, they come together to iron out differences between the Senate and the House versions of the bill. And so when these issues are worked out, it's going to be sent back to each chamber for final passage, and then it's going to be sent on to the president. Now, the president has a couple of different options. He can sign the bill, and when he signs it, it becomes a law. He can veto the bill, which is a refusal to sign the bill into law. He has 10 days to send the bill back to the chamber that it originated from. And at that point, Congress can choose to either override the veto or, start from scratch or kind of just let the veto stand. Congress can override the veto by a 2/3 majority vote in both chambers. Veto overrides don't happen that often because it's very hard to get the 2/3 majority needed to override a veto. And also the attention span of politicians is really not that long, and so by this time they've already put it out of their mind and they're moved on to something else and they don't want to take the time to go back and mess with it. Or a pocket veto can occur. And this is where the president neither signs nor vetoes the bill. And if Congress adjourns in the 10-day period that the president has, and the president does not sign the bill, then it dies. So he doesn't have to get any blood on his hands by killing the bill, but it effectively doesn't go into law. Now, if Congress is not in session, if they adjourn, Congress is not in session, they cannot override that veto. And so it kind of is an easy way out for the president. They don't have to get any blood on their hands, and but the bill doesn't become a law all on its own. So how does Congress decide? There are a number of different things that influence Congress, and the first one are constituents. And because they want for re-election, politicians will pay attention to their constituents on some level. However, the caveat here is that constituents rarely pay attention to politics or the policies that representatives support. And because citizens don't pay attention, the constituents really don't pay that much attention to what a congressman or woman is doing, then congressmen are kind of given a free rein to do, whatever they feel is important. Because by and large, we don't really pay that much attention unless it's one of these big pieces of legislation or big ideas or something of that nature. And so they'll do things to try to sway their constituents. They'll do things to try to appease their constituents, but by and large, constituents don't even pay that much attention. Interest groups have a significant impact on how Congress decides. Interest groups are defined as groups of people who align based upon a shared interest and who work to protect that interest. And so they can do anything from mobilize voters to serve as watchdogs, to supply candidates with money, to influence legislation. They can do any number of things. And there are a ton of interest groups, which we'll get to in a later chapter. Party leadership has a significant role in how Congress decides. Party unity votes. One political party, approximately 50%, vote one way, and the opposing party, approximately 50%, vote another. And so party leadership will sort of tell their parties how they should vote, and by and large, that political party will vote along party lines. Leadership political action committees, they're used to raise funds that are distributed to other members of their party running for re-election. And so sometimes if you do not support what the party platform is, then leadership political action committees might withhold funds to assist you in your re-election. Committee assignments have sometimes been used. It's illegal to award a committee assignment for loyalty, but you might receive a very plum committee assignment for towing the party line and doing whatever it is you're supposed to do. Access to the floor. In order to speak for or against a certain bill, you have to have access to the floor. And access to the floor is given by party leaders. And so if you don't support it, support the party and what they're trying to accomplish, then you might not be given very much floor time. And so as a result, you don't gain the notoriety that you need to be reelected. The whip system is important. It communicates the leader's wishes and expectations, and it works to gin up support for the legislative agenda of the party. And then log rolling. This is the idea of agreements, of compromise, of supporting something so somebody supports your thing. Agreements made between legislators in exchange for support for another bill later. So I'll support X if you'll support Y. Okay, and the presidency. The president is very powerful in helping to sway individuals. They can call up a congressman and said, hey, you know, why you need your support on this or that. And a call from the president can go a very long way in helping to get a piece of legislation passed. One of the things the president likes to do, not just this president, but other presidents as well, is to utilize Air Force One. If you call some freshman congressman from some flyover state somewhere and say, hey, I've got a trip down to such and such, why don't you come with me so that we can have a meeting on the way? Well, Air Force One is the plane that the president uses, and it's the most exclusive, most highly technological plane probably in existence. And so it really dazzles a lot of people. And so the president can utilize it to kind of sway people one way or another. And then there's partisanship, congressional polarization. We vote for something because we are Democrats, or we vote for something because we are Republicans. And so partisanship helps a significant amount. There are some extra legislative duties, some other duties that Congress is supposed to perform that are not legislative in nature, and that's to help with the implementation of laws, to give advice and consent to the president, meaning that when the president tries to appoint somebody to the cabinet or to the federal judiciary, to the federal to be a federal judge, the Senate has to vote to approve them, and then they also take part in impeachment. All right, so this is going to bring us to the end of this lecture on the Congress, and we're going to move on to the presidency, which will be the next couple of lectures. Again, please forgive me for the length of these videos. I try to break them up as much as I can, but I want to get them in and not, I don't want you to have 500 videos that you have to watch. So yeah, if you need anything, please let me know, and I'll see you in the next lecture.